So, These Violent Delights. I've got a lot to say about it. Strap in. So, yes, I'm going to be talking about These Violent Delights and Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gong, the duology. I always hesitate to call any video of mine a review because, I don't know, a review just sounds too professional and polished and, like, organized, and that's not me. Like, I don't know, it doesn't feel right. So I like to call this a discussion. I am just going to discuss how I felt about this duology and why, spoiler alert, I didn't like it. So a couple of disclaimers. Yes, this video is going to be mostly negative. If you are hoping for anything else, this is not going to be the video for you, probably. Also, everything I'm saying is my opinion. I think that's usually pretty clear, but I always just feel the need in negative videos to clarify because, I don't know, it just makes me feel better. So everything is my subjective opinion. Clearly, a lot of people love these books. I mean, go on Goodreads, you'll find a ton of positive reviews. So you don't need to look too far to find people that actually like it. So, a negative opinion is okay every once in a while. Also, this is going to be full spoilers. Just a fair warning, if you wanted to read these books, you might not want to watch this. Otherwise, let's talk about this duology. So, These Violent Delights and Our Violent Ends by Chloe Gong is a duology that is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. So this story is set in 1920s Shanghai. The main characters are named Juliet and Roma in this. So it's got the retelling aspect. Obviously, we're going to see kind of the same plot line as the original Romeo and Juliet play. But at the same time, there's kind of this other plot line running through the story of a monster found in Shanghai that seems to be infecting people with a madness that makes them tear out their own throats. So Roma and Juliet, who are in rivaling gangs in Shanghai, decide to work together to get to the bottom of this madness and try and stop its spread through the city. There's also kind of mounting political and gang tensions as well. So that's kind of the entire idea of the whole plot of this story. So I do just want to say that honestly, I went into These Violent Delights excited. I like retellings. That's a marketing technique that usually gets me as a reader. Like if I hear that something's a retelling, I'm like, ooh, that sounds fun. I want to read it. And honestly, until a little while ago, I had not heard bad things about these books. Like I thought that everyone just loved them. I thought they were super fun. I thought they were probably going to be a little soapy, and that's fine, if you go into it knowing that. But the reason I like retellings is because it's kind of a familiar story. Sometimes I think when I go into a book, I'm cool to be dropped into this new secondary world and learn about a whole new magic system and characters and society and all that stuff. But sometimes it's nice just to get a story that you already know, just told in a different way. It's just a different reading experience that is just nice sometimes. And I also love that with retellings, I get to see the creativity of the author and how they're going to reimagine the original story and bring it into a new light, kind of. So it's all very exciting to me. And I thought the plot of this one sounded interesting. I mean, I wasn't super drawn in by the plot, but the fact that it was a retelling and also the setting, 1920 Shanghai, that sounds cool. So I was totally down for it. However, pretty much nothing about either of these books worked for me. The duology was a huge disappointment. And I'm going to tell you why. Every time I read something that's hugely popular that I don't like, I always feel the need to break it down and kind of analyze why I didn't like it and why it didn't work for me. It's just, it's something that I do. So I'm doing it now at a camera to post to the internet. So that's what we're doing. So let's start with the first book, These Violent Delights. As I said before, there's a monster that's kind of spreading a madness around Shanghai. Roma and Juliet have to get to the bottom of it. I rated this book 1 star. And let me tell you, I never rate books 1 star. I always feel too bad about it to rate things 1 star. But I could not, my mind would not let me rate it anything else because there was not a single thing about this book that worked for me. Not one thing. Not any aspect was fun or good. At any other time, I would have DNF'd it. I absolutely would have just stopped reading it. But I really wanted to get to the end and see how she was going to end it and how she was going to, either stick to or diverge from the original Romeo and Juliet story. Like, I just had to know. My brain needed to know, and I wanted to read it and not see it in a like synopsis somewhere. So that's why I kept going. So let me just talk about kind of the different elements of this book and why I didn't like them and why they didn't work for me. First of all, the mystery. A huge part of this book was a mystery subplot, as I explained earlier about Romeo and Juliet trying to get to the bottom of this madness. Usually when an author includes a mystery subplot, it's super engaging. I absolutely love it. It gets me to keep turning the pages. It always draws me in. Like, it's always a win for me. The mystery in this book was a whole lot of nothing. It wasn't exciting. They didn't ever find answers on their own. Every answer was kind of dropped into their laps. So it was super passive of a mystery. It was really boring and it wasn't fun at all. So I was not drawn in by the mystery aspect at all. So like already that's a big red flag that there's not great storytelling going on, but that's not the worst of it. So next, world building. The world building was also not great. What do you think I'm going to say? As I said before, I thought it was really cool that this was going to be set in 1920s Shanghai. Like, that's a really unique setting. I haven't seen that in a book before, but nothing the author did placed us there. I would never have known that this was Shanghai in the 20s if the author did not explicitly state it multiple times. The world building, like the scene setting, it was abysmal. I mean, I guess if like maybe you're more of a historical buff, you would know the political cues of what's going on at this time to place you in 20s Shanghai, but I'm guessing for most people, we don't know about that. I mean, I certainly don't know about any, I don't know anything about history, okay? So that didn't help me at all. But the parts that Chloe Gong did put in about 20 Shanghai, specifically about what was going on politically at the time, were super dry and read like a textbook. It was not fun. It was super ham-fisted every time she tried to do any sort of world building. So it was not a fun experience. The writing / the prose, kind of all the same thing. The prose was really clunky. I honestly feel that this book was barely readable. I do have a certain style of prose that I like. I don't like overly flowery or like pretty writing. It doesn't gel well with me. But even so, I can usually tolerate it. The writing here was so just strange. Like the way that Chloe Gong would construct a sentence was so weird to me. Multiple times I was like, what are you actually trying to say? And why did you pick the weirdest way to say it? I could tell that she was clearly trying to be poetic, but I think she was just trying too hard. I tend to forgive writing sometimes when it's a debut, but this was just so not good. Like, I don't want to call it bad because I'm sure some people probably like it, but it was not good for me. For example, she tended to have a lot of run-on sentences that really got lost along the way. I always thought of that Michael Scott meme where he says something like, sometimes I just start a sentence and hope it finds itself along the way. And like, I really think that was Chloe Gong's MO here. Let me just read you this little passage. I had to take pictures on my phone because I read from library books. So they say Shanghai stands tall like an emperor's ugly daughter, its streets sprawling in a manner that only the limbs of a snarling princess could manage. Already, huh? It was not born this way. It used to be beautiful. They used to croon over it, examining the lines of its body and humming beneath their breath, nodding and deciding that it was well suited for children. Then the city mutilated itself with a wide, wide grin. It dragged a knife down its cheek and took the blade to its chest, and now it worries, not for finding suitors, but merely for running wild, drunk on the invulnerability of inherited power, well suited only for profit and feasting, dancing and whoring. What was that? I'm pretty sure I read that paragraph like 10 times because I was like, what the actual heck is happening right now? What are you what's the imagery? This is no. I want to just read one more for this. Juliet was looking right at Roma. She couldn't stop looking. She looked at him and she wanted to burst with all that she wanted to say, all that she wanted to hear, all that she wanted to be rid of. Everything. Everything was tight. Her lungs, her skin, her teeth. She was too big for her body, bound to erupt into pieces and become a segment of the natural world growing in the cement cracks. What am I supposed to take away from that? It was such a strange way to end that little piece of imagery. I don't know. Anyways, I still have a little more to say about the writing. First of all, we're told so much of everything. She's a very big fan of telling. You know, the show don't tell rule. Chloe Gong does not follow that rule. So it was hard to buy into anything she was telling us because she was telling so much instead of actually showing us the evidence. Also, I want to say that her scenes, like she writes the shortest scenes I've ever seen in a book. They happen so quickly. It starts and then just a few pages pass and the scene is done. And these are like big dramatic scenes too that should be taking a long time. That could be a whole chapter in one scene, but she just breezes through them. So the pacing is very weird. The plot was so boring. This book was so boring. It dragged so much. The pacing was abhorrent. As I said before, I wanted to stop reading this so many times. It never was interesting. I didn't want to keep going for the plot's sake alone. I only wanted to keep reading to see how she would end it. This all stems from the fact that this is too long. This book is too long. It also didn't need to be broken up into 2 books. I'm going to get into that a little bit later, but the book was too long. It needed to be trimmed down or the 2 books needed to be melted into one. Anyways, I'll get into that. But I just think that the pacing could have really been relieved if a lot of stuff was cut out from this book. So anyways, I want to talk about the characters now. The characters were maybe the worst part to me. Characters are usually the most important part of a story. If I don't like the characters, at least some of the characters in a story, there's almost no hope that I'm going to think a book is good personally. Characters are very important. I can put up with a lot of things in a book if the characters are at least fun. If I don't like them, if they're at least fun, you're golden. In this book, I don't think there was a single character that I liked in the least. Most of the side characters were just flat and so boring. I didn't care about them. And then as for the 2 main characters, first of all, Roma was a wooden board. This boy had no character. He had no personality. He was not interesting in the least. I couldn't even tell you one single character trait that he had. I couldn't assign one trait to him. Not one. He wasn't even 1 note. He was 0 note. He was a big blob of nothing. Give us nothing, Roma. Also, his last name, Montagov. He's supposed to be Russian. He's supposed to be a Russian immigrant of Shanghai. And Montagov and Roma both, like his entire name does not sound Russian. It sounds made up. Like it actually sounds like a made up Russian name. I feel like Chloe Gong did the bare minimum for naming this character. Like she could have made it sound more Russian. I don't know. Anyways, moving on. So Roma was not great. Juliet was awful. I think she is probably the worst protagonist I have ever seen in a book, both in terms of character writing and in likability. I freaking hated this girl. She was the worst person, the actual worst person that's supposed to be likable and supposed to be good that I've ever read. She was so rude to everyone and she had an ego the size of China. She was awful. I want to pull up some examples for her. First of all, she goes to like a hot dog stand or something. I don't know. It's probably not hot dogs, but it's like a food cart out on the street, basically. And I think she just like barges up to the front of the line or something. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe that's just in my mind what she did. But anyways, she goes there. It says, Juliet looked up suddenly, finding a paper bag already hovering in front of her face. Only the best for the Princess of Shanghai, the old shopkeeper said, his elbows resting on the perch of the serving window. Juliet summoned her most dazzling smile. Thank you, she said, taking the bag. Those 2 words would give the shopkeeper plenty of material to brag about when he met up with his friends for mahjong tomorrow. That's quite an ego you have there, Juliet. And then also later on, there's like a messenger comes to her house. Oh, by the way, I never really explained. Juliet and Roma are supposed to be the heirs of their gangs. So they're each the children of the heads of their respective gangs, the Scarlet Gang for Juliet and the White Flowers for Roma. So like they think they're hot shit. They think they're really tough cookies. They think they're big shots. So a messenger comes into Juliet's house and he doesn't know who she is. Like, he doesn't know that she's important, according to her. So he whistles to try to get her attention to tell her something. It says, the messenger whistled again. So she throws a knife at him, okay? She throws a knife at this guy. It drew a single drop of blood from his ear. And then she says, you don't whistle at me. I whistle at you. Understand? Christ. We're supposed to like her? So yeah, Juliet was honestly the worst. Like, those are just a few examples. I stopped tapping them after a while of like the parts where she really got my blood boiling, but she was not a good character. So the fact that we had to follow her throughout this whole story and like we're supposed to sympathize with her and get behind her, I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me, because no way in hell is that happening. And overall with the characters, I think Gong had a tendency to assign random traits to people. It happened really often. It felt like sometimes she would just kind of pull a trait out of thin air and assign it to someone, and then it would never be brought up again, nor was it ever mentioned before this point. It's like, in this moment, this character has always been, I don't know, artsy or something. Like, it's something weird like that, you know? She would just assign something because it fit her little poetic writing moment or her imagery at the moment, but it didn't make sense for the character. And I don't know, it just felt like it came out of nowhere, just to try to get them seem more real, I guess, or realistic. Or she would introduce a certain characteristic or a trait and then kind of contradict it a little bit later. So it's just really frustrating to try and see her keep doing this. For example, there's a point in the story where Roma goes to like an underground boxing match, and it's where the White Flower gang, his gang, I think it's like a frequented spot for them. Like, it's a safe spot kind of where they can just go. And he talks about there how he's seen as the heir of the gang and he's a killer. So this other guy that's there, that's kind of his rival, Dimitri can't shoot him while he's there because of these things about Roma. But then a few paragraphs later, like a page later, she talks about how Roma is seen as a child by the gang and he's losing their respect. So like, which is it? He's a cold-blooded killer and the heir of this gang, or he's a child and doesn't have their respect? Like, which is it? He either can't be shot or they don't care about him and he can be shot. What is it? It's that kind of thing that she kept doing over and over that just got really frustrating, because I'm like, what are you saying? Okay, last little element of this book I want to talk about is the romance, because obviously that's a big part, you know? This is a Romeo and Juliet retelling. After all, the romance better be there and very present. And it was there, but it was not good. It was just nothing. It was a nothing romance. I didn't feel anything for it at all. Like, it didn't draw any emotion out of me. It didn't compel me. It didn't interest me. You know, I talked about how she likes to tell, not show. We are told so much about their relationship because they did actually have a past relationship. She makes the decision here to have Roma and Juliet have already been in love in the past, and they dated in the past as younger kids, like I think probably around 15 or something. They're 19, 20-ish now. So she made the decision to have them already have that relationship. They broke up and now they like hate each other, I guess. And now they're starting to get closer in this current narrative. And I think it made the romance in the present weak, very much weaker than if she would have just had them first met and fall in love in the current narrative. The whole time we were just told we used to be in love. We used to love each other. But why though? You're not showing me anything about it to make me feel anything. So I don't believe it. It just feels like nothing. It's so sad. It also doesn't help that I don't like either of the characters in this main romance. So like, if I don't like the characters, I'm sure as hell not going to like or care about the romance. If you don't have strong characters, I don't care about their interpersonal relationships. So you can probably see why I gave this 1 star. I didn't like it at all. So that's kind of my spiel about These Violent Delights. Let's move on to Our Violent Ends, which is the second and final book in this little duology. So Our Violent Ends, really this book kind of deals with the rising political and gang tensions that are going on in Shanghai and how that all kind of fits together. And in this book, Roma and Juliet, instead of kind of trying to get to the bottom of a monster subplot and a madness, whatever plague subplot, they're kind of more trying to deal with all these tensions and figure out how to maybe try and keep Shanghai in one piece. I did rate this book 2 stars. I liked it the tiniest bit better than the first book, enough to raise it up to 2 stars. Did I like it? No, not at all. I wanted to quit this one too so many times while I was reading it. But I will concede that it was at least better than These Violent Delights. Like, clearly Chloe Gong has become a better writer by this book. So, I rated it accordingly. But this book really kind of takes a hard left turn and goes a completely different direction than the first book, which I'm of 2 minds about, because on one hand, this is what I'm more interested in. I didn't care about the monster subplot. She's kind of getting into the drama now that I wanted to be explored, which is the gang tensions. I don't care about the politics. I'll explain that more later, but the gang stuff I was interested in. That was where the drama was. So that's what I wanted explored. So I'm glad that she kind of drops the monster thing for the most part and explores the gang side more. Like, that's cool. But on the other hand, the other side of my mind, I'm like, these don't even feel like the same story anymore. Obviously, they're 2 different books, but it should be kind of a continuous story between the 2, because you've got the whole Romeo and Juliet plot going overall for both of them. They feel completely different, not even hardly related, just because the focus shifts so wildly. So I don't know, I'm conflicted about how I feel about that, but needless to say, either way, it is very weird. But as I said before, I did read this 2 stars. I was surprised to find that, I enjoyed it at least a little bit more. Overall, my criticisms from the first book pretty much still apply here, with a few differences that I just want to note. First of all, this book was so much more readable. Oh my gosh, her prose improved so much. She did away with a lot of the really inane imagery and metaphors that she included in the first book that were just weird. So I was happy about that. It's not to my taste still, but I wouldn't say that it's bad. Also, I will say that Juliet wasn't as awful and hateable in this book as she was in the first book. She at least got a little bit better. Gong toned her down quite a bit. I wasn't sure I wanted to get through another 500-page book hating the main character so much the whole time. She's still pretty annoying. Like, she's not a great character, but, at least I didn't want to punch her through the whole book. So it's one step in the right direction. Also, I'll just say Roma was still Sans' personality. Like, he had no personality still. He did not improve one bit. So, oh well. On the other end of the spectrum, so those were things that I kind of liked more than the first book. On the other end, I think the world building was way weaker here than in the first book. Obviously, I had a lot of problems with the world building in the first book. I talked about that. But in this book, she really relies so heavily on this political subplot of the different kind of political factions coming in and vying for power in Shanghai. And I think she set that up and explained it so poorly. I didn't know what the hell was going on with the politics. It went so over my head, which is unfortunate because it's such a big part of the story. I just think she didn't explain it well at all. I didn't know what each of the political factions wanted. I didn't know what the stakes were for each of them winning and losing, like what they wanted and how things were going to change. I didn't really understand how they were involved with the gangs all that much. So I didn't understand how Juliet and Roma's lives were going to change all that much. As a result, I didn't care about it because it was set up so poorly. So that was unfortunate. Also, in this book, especially, the miscommunication trope is rampant here. It's rampant in this book, and I freaking hate that trope. Does anyone like it? Why do authors continue to use that trope in their books? It's never good. It's always frustrating. Why? So it's here because at the end of the first book, instead of, because in the original Romeo and Juliet, Mercutio dies. I think Romeo kills him. And in this story, she has Juliet fake kill him. His name is Marshall in this story. So she has Juliet fake kill him. So he's not actually dead. They're just pretending for him to be dead. And the whole book, Juliet just makes this decision that she can't tell anyone that he's alive, that Marshall's alive. I honestly, honest to God, don't know why. She explains it in the text, and I still don't know why she can't tell anyone. You can tell people. People can keep secrets. There's no strong reason other than it just creates more drama. Unnecessary drama. Because she does eventually reveal the secret later, and nothing changes. It doesn't change, the safety of any of them. No one is in more danger because she revealed the secret. There was no reason for her to do that. It was just a cheap attempt at drama and conflict, and I wasn't having it. It makes Roma hate her. It makes the Benvolio character, his name is Benedict in this, it makes him hate her. So anyways, I just was screaming at them all the time, just talk to each other. It was so frustrating. All that being said, I think the worst thing about this book, this one in particular, was that Gong seemed to have kind of gotten lost in what she was trying to say. Her themes were all over the place, and they only seemed to matter when she needed them to, when she remembered. For example, Juliet is all about violence and using her gang to kind of get ahead and keep her ahead. And then all of a sudden, it's like she turns on a dime and suddenly hates violence and thinks the gangs are bad for the city, and is all about stopping the gangs and stopping the politics and overthrowing her family. It goes from 0 to 100. There's no growth. There's no gradual change. It was so weird. There's no logical progression there. It's she just changes her views in a second and runs with it for the whole second half of the book. So it was just really discombobulating, and it felt really empty to me as a result. The whole book just kind of felt empty. It led to me never connecting with the book, never feeling any emotions that Gong was clearly trying to make us feel, and it just all fell really flat. Overall, you can tell that I just didn't have a really great experience reading this duology. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the overall story of the overarching kind of story of the two books. First of all, I'm just going to say this whole thing felt like an edgelord retelling of Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet, but this time they're edgelords. That's how it felt to me. Yeah, so I couldn't take it seriously because I was just you guys aren't as cool as you think you are. Another thing I would just want to mention that was present in both books is the use of heirs. I kind of talked about it before, how Roma and Juliet are both the heirs of their respective gangs. They always brought it up and talked about it, and we're talking about their powerful daddies. I don't know a lot about gangs, okay, in real life. Do family members usually succeed their parents in taking over a gang, an organized crime group? I don't know how that goes in real life, but here it just felt so weird. It felt so cringy to have them always be I'm the heir to this gang. It just screamed, you didn't do any of the work, your father did, and you're just reaping the benefits without having any credibility to show. It gave off very egotistical little Draco Malfoys running around being my father will hear about this. Do you know who my father is? It was not a good look for either of them. Every time they brought it up, I'm the heir to this gang. I'm the heir to blah, blah, blah. It just reminded me that thing was handed to them. They didn't earn it. It was handed to them because of who their fathers are. Unlike other characters who actually had to work for their positions. You didn't do anything. Your parents did. Stop using your title as a bragging tool. I have an example for, Roma had hijacked a car. To be fair, he really had no choice. And when the heir of the White Flowers marched towards you with a pistol in his hand, demanding you get out of your car, it did not matter what important position you held in the municipal administrative council. You got the hell out of the car. Did you have to say the heir of the White Flowers? Couldn't you just say a white flower with a gun in his hand? I think the gun was enough. Did you have to say when the heir marches up to you, you do what he says. Get over yourself. So that whole thing, it added more to the edgelord kind of aspect. You guys aren't as cool as you think you are. You really aren't. I just had to talk about that. Also, as I said before, I mentioned this when I first started talking about Our Violent Ends, but these two books felt so disconnected from each other. It felt like two completely different stories. And of course they are two different books. So they're separate. But they should feel more similar. There should be more cohesion between the two because it's kind of one overarching story. It also, the way that Chloe Gong kind of arranged the story and constructed it was almost at the end of These Violent Delights, it was kind of the whole plot reset. The monster plot reset, all the emotional arcs reset, and we basically had to start over from square one in Our Violent Ends and do everything again. Every interpersonal relationship that was built up in the first book had to be done all over again. Everything concrete, every external thing that they did in the first book also had to be done all over again. It was so frustrating. It was I don't need to read the same book twice. You could have cut out so much of this and had it be one book and it would have been just fine. Why the 2 books, Chloe? Why? It made it extremely tedious to get through both of these books. And this is like almost 1,000 pages between the 2 of them. I mean, it might actually be 1,000 because they're both around 500 pages. It was a waste of time. They were also both just super messy. As I kind of touched on before, the themes were all over the place and the plotting and the pacing was very messy. The balance of the plots and the subplots was abysmal. So that was kind of my thoughts overall on the story of these 2 books. Now, what I would really like to do is talk about the retelling aspect of it, because I feel like the retelling of Romeo and Juliet was kind of a complete failure. I kind of mentioned this in my last wrap-up video, which was at the time of filming. My last one was my June and May wrap-up, where I said that for These Violent Delights, I was like, the retelling is a complete failure. And I still mean that. After having read the second book now, I still think it was a failure. So the thing about retellings is I think they're fun. I mean, I like them, as I said earlier in the video, but there is an inherent danger and a fine line you walk with retellings, which is that you have something to directly compare your story against when you choose to do a retelling. You have the original story, the original text, whatever it is, whether it's a movie or a fairy tale or, a play in this case, you have something that people can directly compare your story against, to compare and contrast and see what was better and what changes were good, what shouldn't have been made. And so the whole time, I'm just thinking like this element was done so much better in Romeo and Juliet. This other thing was done so much better in Romeo and Juliet. It was a better story overall. And to be completely honest, Romeo and Juliet is absolutely not one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. It's not even close to one of my favorites. I actually don't really love it all that much. I think there's some fun things about it, but there is value in it, and I can see why it was popular. Like, it's a very melodramatic play. At least the melodrama of Romeo and Juliet is very enjoyable, if not super emotional. Basically, I don't think there was a single change made in this retelling of Romeo and Juliet for the better. I don't think there was anything that was changed that was a good decision. First of all, the romance. I think the romance was so much worse in this story than in the original Romeo and Juliet. I think the decision to have Roma and Juliet know each other and have already been in love was quite possibly the worst decision she could have made. Because now we are missing all of the yearning and longing and innocence of like the first love, young love. In the original Romeo and Juliet, the romance is new, it's fresh, it's exciting, it's fun. We miss all of that. And now we're stuck with them just continually telling us we used to be in love. We used to love each other. And you're going to have to take our word for it because we're not going to show you. So all of the angst is stripped away because of that choice. Also, I think what Gong tries to do here is have kind of an enemies to lovers thing going on. And, in the narrative, it's really not an organic progression from hate to love. Things just kind of seem to shift at random intervals, like emotions and feelings shifted at random points. So the relationship, the romance in this was kind of like a stair climb instead of a smooth escalator ride from one point to the next. This is kind of in thanks to the miscommunication trope, as I had mentioned before, like that totally screwed with things and not in a fun way. So I think the romance was just objectively worse here. I shouldn't use the word objectively, but it was definitely worse. She made the wrong choice, in my opinion. Also, in the original Romeo and Juliet, at the end, the deaths of the leads, the deaths of Romeo and Juliet were supposed to be an inspiration to stop the violence and fighting between the two families, the Montagues and the Capulets. And it's like this very powerful moment for both families to see their fighting kind of killed these two young people. And Gong kind of goes in the same direction in this story. I did say this was full spoiler, so she does have Roma and Juliet die at the end, although apparently they're not actually dead, but that's not revealed in the story. So Gong does have them both die at the end, but there wasn't a huge focus in the overall narrative of the gang violence kind of tearing these families apart. Well, the gangs apart. It's kind of focused on more in the second book, but I think overall, she just had too many things going on because we had that whole monster subplot. And then we're supposed to just forget about that. And then the second book kind of be like, oh, actually the gangs are the most important part of the story. So the deaths of the two leads it just doesn't matter as much, I feel like. And then in the epilogue, she tries to talk about how the deaths of Roma and Juliet inspired the whole city. Like everyone remembers them and things started to become more peaceful and they gave us hope. This is again another example of Gong telling us without showing us anything. You're not showing me the evidence of this. So like, I don't believe you. So I don't think that aspect was done very well here. Also, about converting the rivaling families to rival gangs, I'm really not sure about that choice either, because I know like there was kind of some gang activity in Shanghai at the time. Gong talks about that in kind of an afterword in both of her books. So I know that was kind of relevant for the time period, but at the same time, we already have a retelling of Romeo and Juliet with gangs, West Side Story. I actually have never seen West Side Story, but I know a lot of people have and a lot of people love it. And that already uses gangs as a stand-in for the rivaling families. So like, what new thing did you really bring here, Gong? I'm not sure. It's another decision I think was just kind of a poor one. Also, the pacing. As I mentioned before, I really don't think this needed to be 2 books. Both had horrible pacing. There was so many stretches in each book that didn't matter, that were boring as hell. This all could have just been shortened into 1 book. And I really honestly don't know why it wasn't. Like, what was the choice there? Just to sell more books? I don't know. Also, all the nods and the kind of references to the original Shakespeare play were so cringy. Every single time it was like, it felt like an actual elbow was nudging me and being like, remember this? I feel like the member berries from South Park. It felt like Gong was relying too much on the original Romeo and Juliet for references and also just completely ignoring all the most important parts of it. I would really love to know why she made the choice to retell Romeo and Juliet specifically, other than she just liked it. In her author bio that she puts at the end of the book, she says that she thinks Romeo and Juliet is one of Shakespeare's best plays. So obviously she likes it. I would just like to know where does that love go? This story was not reminiscent of Romeo and Juliet in all the ways that matter. So what was the point of having it be a retelling? What was the point of having it being a retelling? So all that being said, that is my rant about These Violent Delights and Our Violent Ends. In conclusion, the disappointment here hurts more because I was excited for this. I did not expect to dislike these at all. I wasn't even expecting the world. I just wanted a fun time and I was still let down, and that's fine. She clearly has a lot of fans. A lot of people really do like these. So whatever. Anyways, if you have ever read These Violent Delights or Our Violent Ends, one or both, whatever, I would love to know what you thought of it. Let me know. I would be very interested to know. If you want to hear more about other books, consider subscribing. I've never said that in the video. So this is my first time I'm going to say consider subscribing because I talk about books more on the channel. I talk about other books. So anyways, until next time, I hope you just have a really great day. Farewell.